there's one last question I want to ask both of you. And you've talked about healing the wound. One of the things Separated Faithful say amongst themselves and chuckle is divorce, the gift that keeps on giving, because it's not an incident that occurred at one time. It goes on for as long as both spouses are still alive. So when you say heal the wound, well, the wound just gets reopened when there's a first communion there. The wound gets opened when the abandoner has his new girlfriend show up. So it's almost like, what does healing look like when the wound keeps going?
Yes. I think it's important not to think of healing as that like do-over button. Like, well, once the wound's healed, it's as if it never happened. You know, this will be a part of your story for as long as you live. And I think where I would say what you could expect from healing is not that you won't still have pain come up, but that you build your life around this event in your life and fill it with richness and connection and meaning in other ways, so that as your life continues, you have sort of, what happens is I do this little drawing when I work with people who are grieving. You know, when it first happens, it's taking up your whole periphery, and it's all you can see. And as you continue living your life and you have more experiences, it starts to become a smaller part of your story, just in the sense of, you know, years have gone by. So it'll be smaller and your points of pain will be fewer and maybe further between, but it will always be there. But it's your job to build a life around it.
Yes, I mean, I agree. And so many times, as a counselor, what you just said, Bay, is a challenge for so many clients that I work with. How do you heal a wound when it seems like the wound keeps getting reopened? And what you might have to do in therapy is acknowledge that, okay, maybe this isn't going to be healed quickly. Maybe this healing process is something that's going to take some time. And there are no easy answers. And giving someone the space to feel that and to tap into that, and rather than avoid that, very often is how it begins to open up, that people begin to realize all the resources that they have inside themselves, but also outside in their community, to function well and actually to begin healing, even if it's just a little bit at a time.
Good.
I'd like to just add something. I think I think what people, at least from my perspective, have needed to hear in the interviews I've done, and this is maybe something has a practical application in therapy. So I think people need to understand that they're acting heroically about a sacrament. So if you're abandoned, the sacrament of matrimony is still intact. What this does do, by you standing for this and recognizing, no, this is a sacrament, you're strengthening the church by standing. You're doing something incredibly heroic. And, you know, I'm about to give a talk at a retreat. It was after a couple of months, and what I'm going to just really try to stress this point is that your marriage makes mine better. Your marriage makes everyone's better. Your marriage makes the church better. The fact that you are standing heroically. Because I think when people are suffering, I guess part of suffering with would include recognizing that there is a value of suffering. I mean, this is obviously a very, Catholic theme that goes back, centuries. There's a value to that suffering. That yes, the suffering is real. But God will still give you the grace to get through this and more besides. That's what is promised us. And so I think that if people realize that there is a point to this, and there's this heroic point, and it can be a real font of grace. I think if they realize that can really help people. I think anyway. I mean, whenever we're going through suffering, I know that I always like to tell the story about my dad. My dad is, because there might be an application for this too. My dad was an amputee for about almost 30 years. And I would go and watch baseball games with him. He'd be at, he only had one leg, but he had part of another leg. And part of the problem is that the mind doesn't want to accept the fact that the body part is no longer there. So we would have what's called phantom pain. So I learned all about that over the course of about three decades. And he'd be in pain, tremendous pain. And I'd be watching games with him, and he'd be like, he'd be sometimes really actually crying out. It would hurt so badly, and this would happen over the course of like an evening. Some days he wouldn't feel it, and some days he'd feel it a lot, and it was all day. Really going through all this suffering, just to the point where, like, I'd be in tears hearing my dad suffer from this. And my dad always said, John, there's a soul in purgatory, it's almost in heaven. I just want to get that soul to heaven tonight. And I would say, half jokingly, I would say, Dad, save a few souls at purgatory for the rest of us. I think you're getting them all out. My father was a Green Beret, and he went on rescue missions. And he passed away a couple of years ago. I wrote a eulogy for him, and I said, my dad ran a rescue mission to purgatory for 30 years of his life. And I think that if my father had not seen that value, it would have been very hard for him to do. But because he did see the value of that, it changed his life. And not only that, but it rippled, right? It changed mine. I think it changed the lives of everybody around him, and realized his suffering is real. Okay? His suffering is real, but the value it has, and I always figure, like, they threw a huge party in heaven when he got there, because all these souls helped get her. And I think that's true for all of us. And I think if people can realize that has a value, that standing for the sacrament, that pleases God. And God delights in not the suffering, but he's delighting in the fact that we're offering it up because we love him so much. And also that marriage, at the end of the day, is not actually about us. Marriage is about God. And I think if people realize we're suffering, they're sort of empathetic with the suffering of our Lord on the cross, right? There's a suffering with Christ when you suffer for the good of the sacrament. So that's just something maybe to keep in mind in terms of people that are really going through a really hard time. Maybe that's something that they can keep in mind, that there is a value and a meaning to what they're going through.